welcome you to Defend Ethiopia Task Force in Europe webinar session. So this webinar is on the topic, or the theme is the role of religion in Ethiopian statehood, and this both historical and contemporary perspective will be presented by our speakers. So our first speaker tonight is Professor Haggai Erlich. So please allow me to introduce him. I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce our first speaker. He's whom I can proudly call a mentor in Middle Eastern studies, Ethiopian studies, and particularly about the Nile River, or as we call it, Abai in Ethiopia. Professor Haggai Erlich is a professor emeritus at Tel Aviv University since 1973 for more than 3 decades. Professor Haggai taught and served as a head of graduate studies in the Middle Eastern Studies in the Middle Eastern History Department at Tel Aviv University. He did his BA in General History and History of the Middle East in this university, and he did his MA in History of Islamic People from Hebrew University. And then he did his PhD in Ethiopian history at School of Oriental Studies, or SOAS, in London. Professor Haggai has published more than, or maybe I'm not sure if it's exact, 23 books and 61 articles. His books are about Ethiopian histories, the Nile Valley and its people, both in the down and upper stream, Ethiopian Middle Eastern studies, religion, Islam, Christianity in Ethiopia, and in general in the Horn of Africa. To mention a few, I think those who are interested in the Nile studies have come across, many of us, the Cross and the River, Ethiopia, Egypt, the Nile histories, culture, mazes, Islam and Christianity in the Horn of Africa. And his last book, if I'm not mistaken, is Haile Selassie, His Rise and Fall. And there are many more. Aside all the academic stuff, Professor Haggai is also an athlete. He was one of the leading national high jumpers in Israel. Finally, please allow me to take this opportunity to say to him, happy birthday, or Mazal Tov, Professor Erlich. You have celebrated, I think it's just a couple of days. It's still okay to say happy birthday. And yeah, with that note, I invite you all to this presentation, to his presentation. Professor Haggai, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mahlet, also for remembering in the good old days. Like 60 years ago, I was representing Israel in high jump. Don't ask about numbers. In any case, I want to share with you some of my thoughts about the role of religions in history. I'm not dealing, I'm just following contemporary affairs, but I'm not dealing with that. Historians should avoid understanding the past from today's perspective. But okay, my thoughts always lead me to 1943. That was the year that Ethiopia was liberated by the British. They controlled Eritrea, and they allowed Ayele Selassie, or enabled Ayele Selassie, to return to the throne. And there was this issue. The political officers in Asmara, in Eritrea, wanted to annex Tigray to Eritrea, as it used to be under Mussolini, not long before that. The political officers in Addis Ababa were against it. They were for returning everything to the emperor. And there was an argument between the political officers in Asmara and the political officers in Addis Ababa. And one political officer, an intelligence one, his name was Cheeseman, Major, later on Colonel Cheeseman, said or wrote a memoir, a memorandum, I found it in the British archives, that those who do not know Ethiopia really think it is something anachronistic, and Ethiopia is collapsing, and it is something that we can divide, and so on. And he wrote to them, those who don't understand Ethiopia do not understand that there is a mysterious magnetism, I quote the document, a mysterious magnetism that is holding this quote unquote crazy structure of the Ethiopian empire. And ever since then, I myself, I was intrigued by this beautiful phrasing. What is the mysterious magnetism which holds Ethiopia? The question is wiser than any answer, any possible answer. And today, it is still a valid question. Is the structure of Ethiopia, he said a crazy structure of Ethiopia is going to hold together what is holding it? What is the magnetism which keeps Ethiopia for 2,000 years or somewhat less? And one can provide many explanations and answers. In any case, one is for sure, the religious skeleton of the Ethiopian structure, of Ethiopian politics. Ethiopia is a case quite unique in the world in that sense. Until 1974, at least, there was no separation of church and state, like in most other Christian countries. In medieval Europe, the church and state separated, and so on and so on. In Ethiopia, Ethiopia was a Christian state until 1974 by definition and by practice. Christianity was the identity of Ethiopia. When I started my interest in Ethiopia, first time I came to the country in May 1970, and then for my doctorate in 1971 too, I felt like delving into a biblical world, that everything practical was sanctioned by Ethiopian Christianity. By the way, I knew very little about Christianity because in Israel at the time, there was like a political approach to avoid anything European or Christian, previously imperialist. And the first time I was reading the New Covenant was because Ethiopia was Christian, and you couldn't understand Ethiopia, you couldn't understand politics, history, without acquainting yourself to the essence of Christianity, and especially to Orthodox Christianity of Ethiopia. So whatever I learned on modern history, Emperor Theodorus and his relation with Abuna Salama, with the head of the church, and the Emperor Johannes, and he's trying to unify the church, and Menelik and Abuna Matthias and Haile Selassie, and everything I was trying to understand was about the religious, even Christian essence of society. For instance, I finished studying everything about Haile Selassie and all the politics and intrigue and foreign relations and internal relations and everything political. And then I said to myself, something is missing there. You cannot understand Haile Selassie without understanding that he was a Christian king everything around him was about the legitimacy the church enacted to politics. Everything that had to do with the spirit of the country, with the traditional conservative point of the country, had to do with the role of the church and the role of Christianity. And in more positive point of view, the people I met in Ethiopia in 1971-72, they were poor. Some of them were very disillusioned, but there was always hope. The eternity of Ethiopia is there. That religion provides, of course, the conservative, past-oriented element of it, but also hope. And for me, I understood it even better when Mengistu came to power. And Ethiopia, under him, was kind of shedding off Christianity, religion, and so on. And for me, the way I saw it, I came there like 6-7 times during the time of Mengistu. It was Ethiopia losing hope. All the materialistic, non-religious answers were not really answerable to daily life and to hopes for the future. So it depends. If religion is there in a moderate way, and in nearly everything, every political aspect of internal affairs, the church, Christianity, the priests were there to help stability, to have some compromise between fighting and battling camps. Where are those priests today? Where is this hope that belief can provide? Is the magnetism losing this or disappeared? I think that very much the subject of this webinar, the role of religion and the role of the church and the role of Christian belief in the positive moderate sense is what Ethiopia needs in order to revive the old magnetism that is very much threatened today, as you all know. So as I look in the past, I think that Christianity was the spirit of the country, the soul of the country, political and everything. And in a very moderate way, I think it's being revived. And I wonder if it will do so. Now, there is another element, of course, important no less than Christianity in Ethiopian history, as it was said already. Muslims are possibly half of the population of Ethiopia. They were marginalized. We don't have time to go into that. Until 1974, the revolution of Mengistu created some equality, but it was equality of misery. But ever since then, Muslims and Islam made it to the very core of Ethiopian lives. I was studying the role of Muslims and Islam in Ethiopian history and external affairs and internal affairs. And like in all religions, things are going back to the early past. And there I'm not the only one, but I used to see the ambivalence of Islam and Muslims towards the Christian Ethiopian state. From the very beginning of Islam, the episode of Muhammad's follower, the first Hijrah, was to Aksum, and the theological Islamic ambivalence about the Christian country. Is it legitimate because it gave asylum to the followers of the Prophet and in fact even saved them? Or is it should be Muslim, Islamic, like everything else legitimate? And this dilemma of Muslims regarding Ethiopia, is it the land of the righteous king, the Najashi, who saved the followers of Muhammad, and therefore it should be legitimate, or should it be Islamic? Because the Ethiopian Islamic tradition is that the king himself, the Najashi, converted to Islam. All external affairs, ever since then, every episode that connects Ethiopia to Islamic countries, along the Nile and the Red Sea and whatever, the Middle Eastern and so on, revolves around this Islamic approach to Ethiopia. After 1974, I think that there was this internal tension within Muslims. Can we accept Ethiopia, like the Prophet ordered us in the beginning of the days, or do we have to win in Ethiopia? And outside observers, me included, looking back to the historical past, various episodes, and we were afraid that Ethiopia will be torn by Islamic Christian rivalry. To my good surprise, the issue of Wahhabism, Islamic radicalism, the idea of winning Ethiopia for Islam, and so on, marginalized in the last years. The role of ethnicity is now much more important and dangerous to the magnetism of Ethiopia than the fear that political Islam and political Christianity will collide. Part of the reasons that I think that most Muslims are now proud to be Ethiopians, they participate in the lives of Ethiopia. Maybe it's also had to do with the Arab Spring of 2011 and all the misery inflicted on the Middle East by Islamic radicals, and the idea that in Ethiopia they have a better place to live as Muslims and Ethiopians. Maybe this is one of the reasons, but I'm satisfied just to see the results, that I don't think there is any other country in the world, 50% or something Christians and 50% Muslims, that the issue of political religiosity is not on the agenda that much. That the Prime Minister of Ethiopia can be a son of Ato Ahmed from Jimma. And this is hardly an issue. There are other issues. So my conclusion in looking back to history of everything I learned is that religiosity is a good part of the Ethiopian soul, of the whole Ethiopian collective soul. There are dangers in that, but in a moderate sense, Ethiopian Christianity, the role of hope and optimism and mediation and everything that the church and the priesthood provided in the past, and the coexistence of Ethiopian Christian and Ethiopian Muslims today, give me a ray of hope that the old magnetism that keeps Ethiopia together is being revived and will overcome all the other internal differences of this country that we all love so much. Thank you.